Awesome. We're on. Okay. Welcome, guys. How are you guys today? Good morning to both of you, both new to the show. Bryce, how's your day going so far?
It's been an early start here. We had some thunderstorms roll through last night, so it's just a nice, quiet morning for sure here in Houston.
And Biddle, how's it going for you?
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I'm here over in beautiful Eastern Washington. It is supposed to be about 107 degrees here today. So
Oh, wow, that
I'll be
sounds
using
hot.
the air conditioning in my house for sure.
I'm always tempted. I should have like on my computer at all times the conversion from centigrade to Fahrenheit because I don't know what it is. I know it's hot. It is hot here today. I've definitely got a bit of a tan, a slight tan going on, but I think it's gonna hopefully cool down a bit. No storms on my end. Fingers crossed. All right, let's kick off. So welcome everybody to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your cost optimization at AWS. I am Stephanie Gooch, your host, and with me, my co-host today is Michael Biddle, and our awesome guest is Bryce Dickens. Hello, everybody. So you guys have met these two before. Biddle is the third person on our little background thing. I think it's below. That's Michael. We do refer to him as Biddle. So yeah, he's the one who makes it rain for all of our customers, doing all that cost optimization. So I'll let him do an intro in a minute. So for those who'll be sticking around, we are going to be talking about Container Chargeback, which Bryce and me have done loads of work in. Bryce is the container guy in our team. And Biddle is going to be helping me out doing some chat today. So let's, as you guys haven't met Michael, then I'm going to call him Biddle. I'm going to say this out now. I'm going to call him Biddle because that's what his last name is and that's his nickname. So apologies.
Only Biddle. Only Biddle.
Yeah, call me Biddle. Biddle is the name. So Biddle, why don't you give us your 1-minute origin story of your background and what you do at Amazon?
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning into the show. Very excited to be here. I couldn't make it the last few weeks because I had just had a baby, so I was on paternity leave with Amazon. Thank you, Amazon. And so my background, I've been here with Amazon for about 8.5 years. I am a commercial architect in our optics team, supporting all of our strategic accounts with their cost optimization journey. Some of my specialties are storage, EC2, RDS, and just overall operational excellence. So very, very pleased to be here and excited for what we have today.
Nice. He's got so much experience at Amazon. It's a wealth of knowledge that I'm so lucky to work with. And Bryce, why don't you do your winner origin story as well?
Yeah, so I have to unfortunately follow up to that because I didn't have a kid recently, which you get all the kudos for that, Biddle. So congrats. That's always a really big step. So that's awesome. I was at ExxonMobil for about 9 or 10 years or so before joining AWS. And while I was there, held a whole myriad of different IT positions. Most notably, coming into this role would have been the experience as a cloud cost manager there at Exxon. And coming here to AWS, what you really see is through the lens of the customer. We focus a lot on making sure that we're customer focused here at AWS. And so it's really amazing opportunity to bring that customer experience into everything that we do. We're trying to make sure that we have the right time at the right moment for the customer and trying to optimize their cloud spend.
Nice. So I'm going to apologize. We're getting a bit of spam in the chat and I'm trying to get rid of it. So please, everyone, ignore the spam and we'll be focusing on chatting. If you do have questions, as always, we do want to get them into the show. So please feel free to ask and we'll try and filter this out. So apologies for that. So let's get into a bit about containers. So as I said, today we're going to be chatting about chargeback with containers. So Bryce, why don't you give us a bit of a rundown? What is your kind of 1-sentence explanation of what a container is?
In its simplest form, a container is just a self-contained running application. And so when you go out and let's say you're building a Python script, just to keep things really simple, you'll have a bunch of dependencies or libraries contained within that script that you're going to be calling in order to execute that. In a container world, you've taken that script, you've taken all the dependencies and libraries, you've bundled them together, and then you're executing in its own runtime environment. And the advantages that you get with that is, one, just portability. Imagine being able to ensure that every single time that you execute that script, you're going to have everything that you need to execute it from an environmental operating standpoint. And when you do that, you build in that resiliency and it becomes super lightweight because You don't need to instantiate an entire application. You just need only the bare minimum of what it takes to execute either that script or that piece of code that you're running in that self-contained environment. So it's very, very powerful in the advent of where we've seen containers come from over the lifespan of roughly the last 10 years or so.
Awesome. Okay, nice. Anything you want to add, Biddle? Any other details about containers that you know?
Yeah, no, it's I've heard containers also referred to as EC4, the next level of EC2, if you will, inside joke. But I think containers are becoming clearly more popular as customers go along the route of looking at how they can mobilize their deployments with as little as work on the infrastructure as possible and keeping it as self-sustaining and healing as they can. And we're here today, obviously, to talk about multiple issues with containers, such as chargebacks and optimization. And so Bryce is our resident know-it-all. So we're really looking forward to this.
So I actually have to sort of put it back on Biddle just for a second. So certainly in your 8 years here and at AWS, in that experience, how have you seen some of your customers really start to dive into leveraging those containers? Are there certain workloads that you see them migrating towards, or certain services, or how does that really look for your customer journeys, especially with your experience here?
Yeah, I can't speak for every customer, but I'll speak to a few kind of stories that I've seen common with different workload types. A lot of the customers that I tend to support in our area of the business have a lot of video-rich content on their platforms, social media, things of that nature. And what I'm finding is, and of course, this doesn't hold true for every customer, but what I have seen is when you're doing a lot of video encoding processing, those container workloads can crunch through those really fast, especially when you pair those up with Graviton instances within that same container. And so some of our customers that I've seen running video coding using Graviton and containers combined are seeing results of up to like 20 to 40% cost savings while also consolidating their instances and running less total machines for the workload. So that's just one powerful use case I've seen kind of come about more recently, especially with the rise of video and the internet and kind of how everything is embedded with rich content online.
Nice. So you kind of have discussed the benefits there. So let's move on, because I want to spend most of the time talking about the chargeback. So just cover maybe, Bryce or Biddle, what are the different types of ECS? So coming in from background as someone who doesn't use containers a lot, I know that you could use two different types. Do you want to go into detail a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two main ways that we see customers leveraging container deployments within AWS is with our two main services of ECS, which is the Elastic Container Service, and then EKS, which is the Elastic Kubernetes Service. And we'll get into a little bit just what those differences are, but there's also another option with Red Hat OpenShift being able to be deployed on AWS. We as a company within AWS have made really big investments in trying to expand that fleet and expand that capability. So for instance, it was just announced for GA of EKS Anywhere. And so with that particular opportunity, you can take the same capabilities that you have in AWS's cloud and run that on-prem in your own instances. And it's a very big extension capability. So unfortunately, we don't have time to unpack that here. But those are the three main ways that we see customers operate containers. You also have a fourth option, which is you just stand up your own EC2 instances and run your own bare Kubernetes deployments inside of AWS. But at least for managed services of what AWS provides, that would be encompassed in EKS and ECS.
Cool. And for anybody else who wants to learn a bit more about containers, there is Containers from the Couch, which is another Twitch show that you can see. And I've just chucked the collection up there. So feel free to check out on our AWS channel. There are other shows that you can go into more details about. So let's also, before we dive into chargeback, I'll define chargeback, and Biddle, please feel free to jump in if there's anything, if you think I'm missing. So the way I look at chargeback is when you have your bill, you want to split it out into different costs for different people. So that could be breaking it down into cost per project, cost for cost center, environment, person. So you're basically distributing your spend across different areas. And it's really key to do that. We use the cost and use report, and we had a chat last week in last week's episode all about the cost and use report and how you can find out some of this information about your spend. We went into detail about that. But I think there's a bit of an issue sometimes with, well, we found, not an issue necessarily, but there's a bit of a tricky bit when you're trying to do certain chargeback on ECS. But Biddle, have I missed anything with kind of chargeback description?
No, I think pretty solid. And shout out Bill Pfeiffer last week coming on the show talking about Kerr. That was awesome, man. I think here's the thing to kind of look at with chargebacks too, right? A lot of folks look at it in terms of how you're going to charge back a certain team within the organization, or how you're going to charge back to a certain maybe business unit. I look at it too as like, how do you keep track of like the special projects that you're running that are kind of your big bets, your moonshots for your company moving forward, that are traditionally always parked in your R&D part of your expenditures within your accounting. Like, you want to make sure those are very crystal clear with your resources. And so that's very important with chargebacks, right? And just don't lose track of that. And I think Bryce will go into that a little bit here too. And that all plays into how we track for unit cost also.
Yeah. And Bryce, got anything to add?
Yeah. So some of the times what we see with chargeback is customers have an idea that they would love to see that visibility, and they want to break everything down to the lowest granular level that they can, so that they understand at a very low level where costs are being incurred and how those costs are being distributed throughout the organization. And certainly with a lot of the technologies that we have within AWS, there are absolute opportunities to do that. What I would posit, or at least challenge, is before starting that journey, try to ensure that there is a very clear direction or a very clear goal of what you're trying to achieve with chargeback. Because depending on the granularity that you want, you can really breed a lot of complexity into those with maybe some custom scripts or some custom tooling, or maybe you're writing some custom queries inside of the Kerr file. And with that, you may be trying to solve a problem that does not necessarily exist yet or will exist in the future for your organization. So just be aware that before you start down the path of chargeback, make sure you want to be very, very clear about where you're headed or why you need to implement that chargeback model.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think people start diving in and just having all the bills, all the costs, trying to figure out, and they don't know what they're trying to get out of it. And that's a great thing to talk to your finance teams about. So kind of pro tip that we've found is that if you're trying to do chargeback, don't assume you know as like a dev what you think that the people who are going to be receiving the bill or managing the kind of costs need to see. I definitely remember writing out, somebody gave me a sheet, like, try and make this. And then we actually spoke to the finance team and they were like, no, we want something totally different that goes straight into SAP. And then we gave that to them and they were so happy that we could actually give them a CSV that links directly into what they're doing. Okay, so we promised ECS. Let's talk about ECS. So
yeah,
before we dive into that, anybody in the comments, if you have interested to know if you've had any kind of queries around ECS chargeback or any key chargeback stories or items that you'd like to share, please feel free to pop those in the comments. We'd love to hear what other people are doing in this space. So, container chargeback visibility.
Yeah.
Bryce, I think we started talking about this, I feel like months and months ago was the first time we discussed it. But do you want to give a summary of the kind of problem statement we had from a customer that drove us to kind of go down this route of what we were talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. So to help delineate the conversation and where we're going to go from this point forward, so we're going to be focusing specifically on ECS and how we bring chargeback visibility into that particular service. This, in some cases, won't apply to EKS, because EKS and how it's structured, or how that is, how you incur cost with EKS, is going to be different than ECS. So that'll be maybe episode, 20 for how we handle EKS chargeback. But for ECS, there's two. Before you start back with any chargeback for a service, make sure you understand how that service incurs cost, because that's ultimately what you're trying to understand, is who is incurring that cost. And if we look at ECS, there's the ways that you consume cost is in your compute, or basically what is operating on the back end to perform the compute for whatever containers that you're passing or trying to do work with. And you do that in two ways. One is through our serverless option of Fargate, and the other option is with the traditional EC2 instance. And how it arose with this particular customer is, like most large enterprise customers, Fargate and its ability to be leveraged within a container world may not meet your technical needs. There may be some type of custom work or some type of storage or state that you're trying to maintain about the application environment that unfortunately you don't have that control within Fargate to be able to do that. So organizations we see at a large enterprise level is they want to leverage EC2. When you leverage EC2, the ability to allocate a charge for a specific task or a service within ECS does not translate directly to the EC2 instances that you're being charged for. So if you look in the CUR or you look in Cost Explorer, so forth, the charges that you're going to see relating to ECS are going to be for EC2, not for the task or the service. And because of that disconnect, it's very hard to understand when you're spinning up a task or a service within ECS, how much is that actually incurring as far as cost-wise.
Awesome. So how did we fix the problem, or how did we come up with a solution, I guess is better wording, for this? What solution you come up with to design? And then I could talk a bit about the infrastructure behind it. Biddle, feel free if there's any questions that we're not making any sense because we just have been too deep into it. For somebody who doesn't know what we're talking about, then jump in and let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this case, what we always want to start is understanding the architecture of how the customer is operating. Because in your chargeback schemes of what you're doing, it's more than likely to enable to get to the granularity that you want. You need to understand the architecture of how the current service is being leveraged. So in this case, for the customer, they had each team can sort of operate on their own, but they have one central ECS deployment within 2 different regions. So no matter what account that you're using, you're going to go in, you're going to tie into the centralized ECS instance. And they have, within that ECS instance, you have a cluster. And that's where we're going to start grouping your services and tasks within the cluster. So once we understood that, then we can go into the CUR file. And in the CUR file, what you'll see is when a task is executed, it will record the name of the task. It will record as well as the cluster that the task is associated with. The reason why that's very important is that's a new functionality that came out just last November from an AWS perspective. So if you're looking in your CUR file today and you don't see as part of the ARN or the unique identifier for that particular task, within that ARN, if you're not seeing the cluster name written, or you're not seeing a separate field of an AWS tag written as a cluster, then that means you need to upgrade to the latest ARN instance, and then you'd be able to see that in the CUR. So in the CUR, you have the task, and that task will tell you what part of the cluster it is. And what we then found out is if you can at least get that cluster name, you can take that cluster name and go over to the EC2 instances that are incurring the cost, and the EC2 instance will tell you what cluster it was a part of. And that's how we're able to start linking back to say, okay, this task executed, it was a part of this cluster. This cluster has these EC2 instances that are incurring costs. So we know, at least at a holistic level, that a cluster is costing X amount of dollars at that point.
Right.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here real quick, right? Like when you talk about ECS specifically, right? Because Fargate's a different world, but with ECS, you can always just tag a cluster of instances that are doing kind of the same workload and same job that maybe aren't sharing that set of resources with other parts within your company, right? There's a couple ways to do this. It just depends on how you are, I guess, architecting your environment, right, Bryce? Like some resources might be shared with different multiple business units. Some resources are contained to one environment or a team that's only doing one type of batch task at a particular time of the day. And like if you find yourself in an environment where you're not sharing resources within that same container, some of your chargeback solutions might be a little less complex than others, right? So I think kind of what it comes down to, and Bryce, don't want to steal some of your thunder here, but is like defining your task definitions along with your rules, and besides just tagging the instances within your container. Great
point. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of in an extension of where we're headed with the solution is one thing I'll mention as well. If you are leveraging Fargate for your compute backend, the good news is it already will tell you in the CUR file at a task level how much that particular task cost you at time of execution. So that's awesome. That's wonderful. Fargate will tell you that. But if you're leveraging EC2 like our customer was, then you're going to have to do some wizardry around that to be able to get that visibility.
Yeah, and I've just posted up the query. Sorry, Bryce. The query for getting that information, which was in the labs, which we spoke about last week. I think we always refer to what happened last time. So feel free to go and check out our YouTube channel to see all those past videos or see it on Twitch. So I'll give a bit of background about the technical side that I did for it, just to kind of summarize it. So basically putting in what Bryce described into CloudFormation. So what we did was we then deployed a Lambda, which went and got all the account IDs for the entire organization because we were pulling all the information from everywhere. And then we went through each of those accounts using a Lambda and pulled all that metadata that we needed. So the tags, the cluster, the service, all the information, and stuck it into S3 so we could use it for chargeback. And then using some very hefty Athena queries, we were able to join it all together. And then using that ARN that Bryce described, we could put it back into the Cur and then do that chargeback reporting. And we tested it yesterday, or we tested it today, and it worked. So that's good. And we're hopefully going to be sharing in the labs a version of this. So if anybody is looking for that kind of a solution and they know that they would like to use it, or they're having a similar kind of problem statement, then please feel free to drop us an email to kind of encourage us to get that a bit faster. So if you'd like this, then please email us at costoptimization@amazon.com. So maybe it's worth also shouting out some of the kind of prerequisites that we need to do this. You've mentioned a couple about the ARN, but are there any other ones, Bryce, that we spoke about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way the queries will work against the Cur is it's going to also look at, because the last logical step that we have is once you can break down the consumption of a task and link that back to an EC2 instance so you know how much a task was consuming, the last logical step that customers want is, okay, great, now I need to group that based upon certain identifiers. So I need to either associate that task to an owner, to a team, to an application, and you can do all of that if you start tagging your individual tasks, which again is a new function that's brought in from the update to the ARN. Mm-hmm. So you need to make sure that you're tagging your task based upon the aggregation level that you want. And then you need to go the second step, which is enable that tag as a cost allocation tag in your billing console. And then everything will come through the Cur, all the queries will work, and you're off and running from that perspective.
Cool. Nice. And Biddle, have you had many customers kind of delve into this work or any other kind of chargeback stuff similar where they've had to kind of pull extra information in to connect to the Cur?
Yeah, and so I can think of one example, and actually we ended up going with Fargate for a few different other reasons. So I don't know if are we here to talk today at all about kind of like maybe when Fargate over ECS? Or
yeah, we can do.
Okay.
We're looking at. Yeah, we've got a bit of time left. We might as well jump on to do a bit of a discussion.
Yeah, just quick touch base on it, right? I mean, because we've talked about a few container models here, and Kubernetes, ECS, and Fargate. And what I found in this specific solution was, besides the chargeback opportunity, we're looking at what about if I have instances that I'm using in my environment where maybe I need the high memory but don't need as high of a compute. And I'm struggling on AWS's instance page to find out what's probably maybe the most optimal fit for me. Like, that's where Fargate comes in, right? Is you get to customize the amount of the memory and the CPU on the workload that's running and kind of get some configurations where you wouldn't be able to find that on a traditional instance. And so that's one very popular use case with why maybe Fargate over some of the other containers. And we find that our Amazon customers are adopting Fargate at a very high pace over the last few years. So within ECS, to your example, right, I think the question was like, what else around like chargeback specifically, prerequisites, how I found with my customers. And you'd be surprised. Our customers are some of the smartest and brightest people that you'll ever run into. But we always find opportunities where we can go back to step one and see, what are we defining as the outputs that we want to get out of this type of measurement? Do we have the right key value pairs, for example, that would give the finance team the insight to what is happening around special project Falcon X, Y, and Z, right? Like, or what is happening around our new development R&D team that we just hired in the last 3 months for this other type of opportunity, right? You find a lot of the architectures and designs that you've put forth were done with their best intentions from something that you thought of 1 or 2 years ago. And then, as things change, it's always worth going back to the basics here and figuring out, am I putting in the right type of key value structure with what I'm defining in my containers. That's going to get me the type of insight and visibility that I want from the Kerr report downstream later. Or otherwise, you might find yourself in a situation where you're trying to make inferences off of existing key value pairs that are great for what they were first designed for, but aren't necessarily giving you the insight for what you want as your team's products and company evolves.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, those people often speak about starting a tagging kind of strategy and like how to go forward, but I think it's rare that people actually take the time to look back if they've been doing it for, like you say, a number of years, and they're like, does this actually work anymore, or have we got all these tags by default? Does our Terraform module that we haven't changed since it first came out have these tags in, and we just assume that they're being used? So that's a great topic. I think maybe if anybody's interested, maybe we should do a follow-up on that. There's a new tagging lab that's just been released, so we could kind of dive into that and then start to have some discussions around tags in general. So we've got 5 minutes left. Why don't we touch, I think one thing that might be interesting maybe to mention would be, how does effective chargeback relate to optimization? Have you guys seen any trends where that you're really good at showing who owns what costs and then actually being able to optimize from that situation? Bryce, have you seen that?
Yes, we have. So there was an instance where a customer was seeing a spike in their CloudWatch spend. And we're not talking about a spike of a few dollars. This was like a 600% increase over in the last 3 months. I mean, it's big, massive. And they couldn't, for the life of them, they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And so what we were able to do is go into the Kerr file and start digging around in what they'd enabled, not only from a tagging perspective, but also marrying that back with a naming convention that they'd established for some of their services within CloudWatch. And it was really through that aspect of being able to allocate that cost back to a specific team and helping them work through that investigation that they found out it was actually a team that was running a POC and forgot to turn something off.
Classic. Of course.
That was a very clear indication where why you want to do chargeback or cost allocation back to a particular instance or team, because it helps in that investigation for tracking stuff down in terms of just pure cost phenomenon.
Great points. Biddle, have you seen much of it?
Yeah, actually, there's a link here we'll put in the chat. One of our customers that we love near and dear, Airbnb, wrote an article on Medium here recently about their journey to cost optimization using the cost and usage report to find such examples like we're talking about. And one that I'll speak to that's written here in their example is looking at not just the vCPU hours on their machines, but also looking at how that related to what was being put into the different types of storage tiers and what it was tagged back to. And they found in their story here that you guys can read through in a little bit, they found that they were actually not taking into account some of the different areas of charging within cold storage that were relative to their different business units. And then so they're able to refine in on that. And over the last year, saved upwards to around $60 million from leveraging these further insights within the Kerr to drive granularity with how they're optimizing their environment. So I don't want to speak too much for them. Obviously, you can read the article. We'll post it here in a moment. But that's a very powerful example. Airbnb, go look them up sometime. Put this here in the chat.
I mean, if that's not, I suggest like enough reason, 60 million to go and look at your Kerr, like we said last week, and dive in and try and do some accurate chargeback. I mean, I don't know what it is. And to advocate, we are not promising that everyone's going to find a spare 60 million in their bill, but I've just popped that in there. So please feel free to go and check out that article. It's really interesting. Okay, cool. We are almost at time, guys. So any last mentions or things we want to shout out before we finish?
Always be saving. Just, your
That's Biddle's motto.
Honestly, I run into this all the time. It's like, give you just an analogy for just like, it's like working out, right? It's not fun. No one really likes to do it, but eventually over time, it kind of pays off. That's kind of how I look at with like tagging and whatnot, right? Your future self will thank your past self. And then you'll be, some business review later, a quarter after the fact, and look like the hero in your company. So always be tagging, always be saving.
That's great advice. I think I always refer to my past self being like, well done for doing something, or why didn't you do something? So that's a great reason. Bryce, anything you want to say before we leave?
Yeah, it'll be real quick. So the customer that we're working with that led to this solution for the ECS chargeback model, one of the things that they're still needing to go back and do is implement those tags. So unfortunately, while the solution is here today and they can leverage it in very minimal instances, for all customers, for anyone operating within AWS, make sure that you're tagging early, tagging often, because just as Biddle mentioned, you never know when your future self is going to thank your past self. Having due diligence, defining that tagging structure, and getting that applied out.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you to my lovely guests. Next week, we will have our first customer on to chat about starting up a FinOps team. So tune in to hear somebody not from the Amazon home, so somebody outside of our little world to come and chat to you. And have a good week, everyone, and see you next time.
Okay.